your voice, your attention, your integrity, they matter more than you know. Whether you are sitting in a boardroom, kitchen table, or maybe both, know that your awareness is a form of leadership. So your ability to pause, to listen, and to contribute thoughtfully is how we rebuild trust. Welcome back to the Integrated Being. I'm Elizabeth, and today I want to share a reflection or reflections that have been living at the intersection of my work and I suppose my home life. But it's something that feels deeply personal, however, very universally relevant, and trying to connect and really share the reflections that I had everywhere I look in leadership meetings and the community spaces I've been creating, and then even around my kitchen table during our evening meals. I sense the same undercurrent, and it's really a longing to build and or rebuild or maintain this aspect of trust, and especially with everything happening, trust in our systems, our institutions, and maybe most importantly in one another, trust in our inner dialogue, trust in our intentions with the relationships we hold dear to us. And so I also am coming from facilitating a workshop just recently around the Future Control Center, which is the idea around, what does the future operator of the power grid require and what systems can be placed in front of them to help them facilitate this transformational time, which is a whole other lecture. But it's easy to look at what's happening in the world, really the political tension, the institutional fatigue, the loss of faith in leadership, and feel like the problems are too big to touch. So the more I observe and reflect, the more I realize large scale change begins in small human systems. And so a couple threads that I pull on, not only on this podcast and this outlet, but, with my children, with my family, with my class, with the membership group that I am so blessed to be a part of. But it's this idea that the control room and the kitchen table are not that different. Both are centers and everything in between. Both could be centers of coordination, of communication, of energy management. Both require leadership rooted in awareness and truthfully humility. So I wanted to talk about, how does one rebuild trust, not just out there, but right where we are in the day-to-day tasks that we do. So where to start? Systems, which is something that I've kind of alluded to prior, my lectures and or, my way of thinking through is this idea that we have lost sight that we all are a part of a system, and many of us are working in systems within systems. So the largest system that I always gravitate towards is a power grid. However, this essence of a governing body or a family, it relies on trust as the unseen current that keeps flowing, or the thread that weaves one all together. And if you ever worked inside a system, being in a technical or maybe even your human commute perspective, you know that it doesn't matter how. And I think that was kind of the takeaway for me during this 3-day workshop, but really grounding myself in the awareness that it doesn't matter how sophisticated the tools are, especially in this world of AI, if the relationships that run them or utilize them are frayed, there's this unraveling. So if we think of a grid only as a reliable as the coordination between its parts, then we can relay that to the governance is only as effective as the honesty between the people. And then our families are only as peaceful as the communications they share. And then so when trust breaks, when there's misalignment or there's fear, the system has to overcompensate and it overreacts. It maybe tries to overcontrol. and eventually overextends. And so just the parallels of our human bodies during the time of fear and having mistrust compared to this large power grid, I just can't, I guess detach the two thoughts at this point. So I think there's a realization that the same thing is happening within us. And so and especially when our inner trust is low and when we doubt ourselves or we lose confidence in others, we start to overfunction in areas that we are trying to manage that, we should instead be flowing with. And I think that's where this large word, and I don't know if it's just me because I'm in the space, but awareness comes in. Trust and awareness, I think, are inseparable. And so we can't store trust without slowing down enough to see what's true. And so a lot of my work as of lately is how do we activate the utility voices within to understand that before we excel or scale or mature to adopt this new creation, these new tools, this new ability, we must ground ourselves in the fundamentals. And so if there ever isn't a time to really latch on to our inner voice, our inner guide, our inner faith, I just can't. I mean, we need it more than ever. So I think there's fracture, that we're witnessing on many scales. And so we are living through a time of system strain. To me, it's so tangibly connected to this physical machine that we've created for a lifeline society that it's so fascinating to relay that analogy to the governing bodies of our communities, but really the governing assets of our human body, right? It's all flowing from the same correlation of energies. So, we have a lot of external pressures that can change the speed of how we adapt and how we embrace modern life. But I guess it all keeps coming back to that recentering. And it's easy to point fingers by what we're witnessing. It really isn't just institutional breakdown. It's a human breakdown, right? It's what happens when a collective nervous system, so think neural networks, become overstimulated. When there's too much input, and it meets too little reflection, there's only cascading opportunities of possible failure. So we've created this world, and I think I'm talking to you, but maybe I'm talking to my children, world that values speed over substance, reaction over understanding, and of course, performance over presence. And as a result, trust, that slow, steady current that truly holds everything together, has been replaced by noise. So, one of the courses that I'm teaching is really how do we become the signal, the strong signal amongst all the noise. But here's the good news. Systems are dynamic and they can repair. So they can heal. And the moment individuals choose to re-engage, to rebuild communication, to listen, to act with integrity, the energy starts to shift. And so I think that's really where the real work begins. And engagement doesn't mean activism or public visibility. Sometimes it means, and this is, I think where I spend a lot of my time, choosing to stay in the conversation, especially when it's uncomfortable. And that may be even your own internal dialogue. And I think we all can relate is truly uncomfortable and is a skill. So engagement is the moment that you decide your presence matters, that your voice matters, be it in the meeting, in the family, in your community. It's a recognition that systems don't heal through avoidance, expand through participation. And it truly does take courage to do so. So the choice to participate with awareness rather than frustration is what I think rebuilds the connective tissue of trust. So thinking about this power grid that, we've developed and created over a century, the need for understanding all of the granular flows was not required based on the original design and phenomena. And so, over time, there's been stories being told and misunderstandings being laid out, and really external mandates and requirements that didn't have full awareness of what it would require or take or where one was sitting to then motivate them. So it caused a lot of frustration. So I see that again, the same parallel. When you find yourself tempted to withdraw or ask, like, well, what would engagement in this day really mean? It starts with eye contact. It starts with a conversation. It starts with picking up the phone. It starts with reaching out to that friend, to that mentor. But it's not shutting down. And so going back to, the kitchen table, and I just bring this up because my smaller table is within my kitchen. And, sitting there, be it 10 minutes or an hour with my family, is truly magical time for me. But, I also feel like without putting pressure on it, is this where habits are born? Um, the ability to educate and inform my younger children of what it means to be present, to have conversation, to allow others to share space, to take turns, to be able to voice one's needs with an audience, and most importantly, to listen. If anyone can relate, having multiple children, there is a significant amount of continuous conflict. And so, how do you manage the conflict with and care at the same moment? Right. And if you think about it, it truly is the most intimate form of governance that we experience. So operating or running or leading or being a part of a family is effectively trying to distribute energy, attention, and love in all ways to keep everyone feel and fed with connection. So when trust breaks down at the kitchen table, or you're not creating a space to develop, I think we as individuals feel this immediately. And if we shut down, silence replaces the laughter, or maybe defensive tones replace the curiosity. These can all elevate to, our own mind chatter as well as the communities and the industries we work in. So when trust is being rebuilt, how does that happen? We apologize, we listen, we extend grace to the moment, right? And the system resets. So if we can't find a way to restore trust around our own space, with those that we love, how can we expect to return to a higher? So I think, a lot of my blog, it's spent with being very intentional with that chatter and your mindset and, finding and thinking through ways of finding the calm and the chaos. It's all related to this much larger issue at hand. So my takeaways are: trust is an active practice. So it's not given, it's grown. So just remembering that daily choices, that transparency, and having compassion is active work. I think also just being aware, there's my word, that microcosms, or, micro scenarios mirrors the macro. So how one handles tension at home really can carry the same pattern into all aspects of our lives. And when I say home, just really home is where the heart is, to be corny, but where you're safe, you're stable, and, your own personal chatter, coming back to that space. So maybe not as literal as I meant, and then engagement, which is the big word that I've been processing for the last 2 years with my recent work activities. It is energy. And so when we're asking those to be engaged, we're asking others to engage in a conversation instead of retreating. And so, like, putting that awareness around what it is to engage, I think, is also incredibly valuable. And just remember that how we enter into the conversation is a part of this system of systems that we're in. And so my last takeaway is that systems, be it our human system, our mental chatter, our familial ties, our community engagement, right? And they all interact and work with each other. They heal when we do. So just, again, tying it back to the integrated being, mind, body, spirit, right? They're all systems within systems, and they are the beginnings of the tapestry that we're all, weaving together in regards to societal repair. So I think for this week, notice where trust is calling to be restored in your life. It might be with a colleague, a partner, a friend, or yourself. Where am I withholding energy? Where can I re-engage with honesty and kindness? So as you observe what's happening across our current nation, in our world, the debates, the decisions, the governing shifts. Remember, and I guess this is more for me and any of you listening, is each of us contribute to this atmosphere of trust and or fear that really defines the whole. So trust. Have a great week and be back next month.